you. And so why did so many Republicans jump the fence to support the Respect for Marriage Act? Well, I suppose you can speculate on a number of things. But I think the bottom line is this, and if you really want an in-depth understanding of the Respect for Marriage Act, you need to go back and watch episode, 1481? Is that right, Christian? Yeah, 1481, episode 1481, we go into in-depth about the Respect for Marriage Act. But here's the bottom line. It's really a superfluous act. Number one, there is no authority for the federal government to define marriage, thus by restricting states to issue marriage licenses. I'm giving you that sort of distinction because I suppose Congress could do whatever they want in some kind of a resolution and say it is the majority opinion of the Congress that marriage is defined between a man and a woman. And that's what it would be, a piece of paper, a simple philosophical, ideological declaration that has absolutely no legal effect whatsoever. Because the bottom line is the federal government has no constitutional authority to define marriage and thus by control marriage within the states. None, zero, zilch, nada. So, this Respect for Marriage Act is superfluous because number one, it does not mandate that a state create a pathway to gay marriage. It does not. It simply says the states who want to have gay marriage can have gay marriage. Now, someone will argue then, I get all these people who are zealously trying to preserve the government institution of marriage between a man and a woman. I say that in distinction, a government institution of marriage between a man and a woman. They zealously try to defend that by saying, yes, but the Respect for Marriage Act, KrisAnne, requires other states to recognize those gay marriages. So does the Constitution. I really hate to be the wet blanket on this, but Christian's going to pop it up on the screen there. It's Article 4, Section 1. It is the full faith and credit section. I thought I had that. Oh, I think I sent that to you. Let me pull that up. I sent that to you in a chat. So I'm going to pull it up so I can read it. And because, yeah, right. I don't have it memorized. Sue me. Okay. All right. Full faith and credit shall be given. This is Article 4, Section 1 of the Constitution. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. And the Congress may, by general law, prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved and the effect thereof. Article 4, Section 1 of the Constitution of the United States says that a marriage license in one state must be recognized in another state. I mean, seriously, can you think of the chaos that would ensue if that were not the general constitutional rule? You could get married, Christian. You could go to California and get married. And then you could decide you didn't really want to be married to that person anymore in California. And without Article 4, Section 1 of the Constitution, you could then move to Florida and claim you were not married because you were living in a different state. Can you imagine the chaos of that? Most states have laws against bigamy, but without full faith and credit, you could literally be married in every single state to a different person. Christian, you could have 50 wives. Or your wife could have 50 husbands, Christian. But you see, this is just one of the public act records and judicial proceedings that is covered under Article 4, Section 1. So we don't need the Respect for Marriage Act when we properly apply the Constitution. A state marriage, first off, let's just clear this up, because I've said this a million times, and there may be some new people watching. Marriage is not a government affair. It is not. Marriage is a spiritual affair. If two people want to create a union that is not through the church, that is not called a marriage, this is called a contract. Or some places call it a civil union. A civil union is a contract. I don't even know why you have to have a different term on that, but a contract. A marriage is something that comes from a church. A contract between two consenting adults comes from the government. So you don't need a marriage from the government. You need a marriage from your church. If you want the government to recognize your union, you need to create a contract. A civil union, a contract. The problem that we have today is the mixing of these civil functions. If you are a Christian and you believe a marriage is a union between a man, a woman, and God, where does government fit in there? Why do you need a license from the government to do something that you're doing by faith commandment of the Bible? As a matter of fact, if you are getting marriage from the state as a Christian, you're mingling your leadership. A marriage is a union between a man, a woman, and God because God is the head of the marriage. If you get a marriage license as a Christian, what you're saying is, well, sometimes God is the head of my marriage and sometimes the government is the head of my marriage, and you cannot serve two masters. Look, I don't care what practicality you are arguing in your head or out loud against me right now. You are arguing faulty theocracy, faulty theology, and you are arguing for government to be your head. You don't need a marriage license to be married in the eyes of God. If you want to be married in the eyes of government, then that should be a separate process. Either way, if it is a civil union recognized by the state government, Article 4, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution says that it has to be recognized in every other state. And the federal government has no authority to sanction marriage, and thereby the 10th Amendment, that power is reserved to the states. So states reserve the authority to define marriage, not the federal government. And Christians should not be asking government to define marriage. You don't need government to define marriage if you're a Christian. You already have a definition. It is provided to you by God. So the Respect for Marriage Act is superfluous because, number one, it just simply states that each state has the authority to define marriage. It does. They do. They don't need the federal government to give them that permission. Number 2, it says that every state has to recognize the marriage of another state. Well, the Congress doesn't need to tell us that because Article 4, Section 1 already tells us that. And the third thing about the Respect for Marriage Act that was passed by 61 senators is that churches are exempted. Religious organizations are exempted. So Respect for Marriage Act does not require that your pastor marry same-sex people if that's not part of your belief. So nothing changes with this. It is a completely superfluous piece of legislation, which makes it bad legislation. Let's just say that. It's bad legislation because it's superfluous legislation. It's bad legislation because it is asserting an authority that the federal government does not possess. Bad legislation. And that's where we are with that. You see, this particular bill is not going to force your pastor to marry same-sex couples if that's contrary to their belief. No, that mechanism is already legally in place, and most pastors don't even recognize it. The mechanism to force pastors to create same-sex marriages beyond their faith is a mechanism that pastors consent to all the time. Anytime your pastor makes a marriage and says, by the authority vested in me by the state of Florida, by the authority vested in me by the state of Pennsylvania, by the authority vested in me by the state of whatever, I now pronounce you man and wife. When your pastor says that and then signs the state marriage license, your pastor has transformed himself into an agent of the government. And as the agent of as an agent of the government, an agent of the government cannot lawfully discriminate. As an agent of the government, they must listen to the orders of the government. So every pastor that says, by the authority vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you man and wife, are consenting to being agents of the government who must listen to the commands of government. And how long before those commands of government are. Now, it won't be long before that command by the government to the agents of government to engage in same-sex marriage contrary to their faith is then followed up by, hey, you're a tax-exempt organization. We don't make you pay taxes. If you want to keep your tax-exempt organization, you have to do as we say. So the solution is not the Respect for Marriage Act. The solution is not a Defense of Marriage Act. The solution is pastors need to stop voluntarily making themselves agents of the state. And there you have it. So again, episode 1481, go back, listen to the full critique of the Respect for Marriage Act, but the final bill that came through the Senate, through its amendments, is pretty much an empty bucket. It's just stupid. It doesn't mean anything, except another assertion that the federal government has a power that they don't actually possess.